Joe Rogan just named Jay-Z in a sealed federal arrest warrant, and what's inside could destroy everything you thought you knew about Hollywood. The bombshell just dropped. During a shocking episode of his podcast, Joe Rogan exposed explosive federal documents tying music mogul Jay-Z to an alleged cover-up of abuse, trafficking, and intimidation at exclusive parties hosted by Diddy Combs. According to Rogan, the sealed arrest warrant doesn't just implicate Diddy, it suggests Jay-Z personally helped silence victims with payouts and threats. One witness even claimed he wasn't just a guest, he was the cleanup crew. The stakes? Massive. With Diddy now on trial for human trafficking and racketeering, and Hollywood's biggest names quietly scrambling behind the scenes, this could be the story that shatters the entertainment world from the inside out. Stay with us. The details are darker and more real than you've ever imagined. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The airwaves erupted like never before when Joe Rogan dropped what may become one of the most consequential episodes in the history of his podcast. With a tone more serious than usual and an urgency in his delivery that silenced even his most vocal skeptics, he didn't hold back. He spoke of sealed federal documents, arrest warrants, witness accounts too disturbing to ignore. And the name at the center of it all? Sean Carter, better known to the world as Jay-Z. It wasn't tabloid fodder this time. Not online rumors or speculative gossip. What Rogan presented was something far more damning. Legal records, court-filed testimonies, and detailed witness interviews tying the billionaire rapper and mogul to a chilling cover-up surrounding the now infamous underground parties hosted by Diddy Combs. These weren't ordinary Hollywood parties. These were elite gatherings drenched in secrecy, surrounded by whispered accusations of trafficking, coercion, and systemic abuse, and now, potentially criminal obstruction by one of the most powerful men in music. But how did we get here? How did an entertainment empire built on glamour, talent, and influence get so deeply entangled in one of the darkest scandals of the century? To understand the gravity of what's unfolding, we must rewind the clock. For decades, Diddy and Jay-Z weren't just music icons, they were cultural architects. Together, they helped shape the sound of a generation, influence fashion trends, and elevate hip-hop into the boardroom. But behind the facade of billion-dollar brand deals and sold-out stadiums, there was another world, one hidden from public view. And according to the information Rogan claims to have accessed, that world was far more sinister than anyone dared to imagine. On his podcast, Rogan outlined the startling contents of a sealed federal document, an arrest warrant prepared by investigators that allegedly includes Jay-Z's name as an accessory in ongoing investigations tied to Diddy's inner circle. The allegations don't claim Jay-Z participated directly in trafficking, but rather that he helped conceal it, paid off victims, pressured silence, suppressed evidence, all while keeping his hands clean publicly. The phrase that shook listeners came from a reported victim quoted in the files. He wasn't just a guest. He was the cleanup crew. Those words alone sent shockwaves through social media. The internet exploded with speculation, fury, and disbelief. How could someone so revered, so seemingly untouchable, be implicated in something this horrifying? What makes this revelation so potent is the source. Joe Rogan is not a traditional journalist. He's not backed by a corporate media entity or driven by political agendas. His platform is powerful precisely because it is independent, a direct line to millions of listeners who trust that if he says something, he's not doing it for ratings. He's doing it because he believes it needs to be heard. And that's what he said on air. This isn't a rumor. This isn't secondhand. This is real, he stated, his voice tight with restrained anger. The documents I've seen, they aren't accusations from Twitter. They're legal. They're part of a real investigation that's been quietly underway for years. He continued by warning his listeners. Some of the biggest names you admire, watch, and listen to, they've been protecting monsters. And some of them are monsters themselves. What followed was a minute-by-minute breakdown of what Rogan called a coordinated system of intimidation, payoffs, and silent manipulation, executed over decades by powerful figures in music and Hollywood. He laid out how events were choreographed with extreme care, always under layers of corporate protection, legal teams, and NDAs. And when something went wrong, when a victim threatened to go public, certain individuals allegedly stepped in not to help but to erase the problem. Jay-Z, Rogan claims, was one of those individuals. And now, according to the evidence presented, federal prosecutors believe it's time to hold him accountable. The podcast episode triggered immediate backlash and furious debate. Critics accused Rogan of defamation, of leaning too far into unproven theories. But his defenders pointed to the evidence, the increasing number of corroborating witnesses, and a growing list of celebrities who have suddenly gone silent, disappeared from public view, or deleted old social media posts. Patterns began emerging. Connections too detailed to ignore. What's more chilling is the calculated silence from Jay-Z's camp. No denial. No legal threat. No comment at all. And that silence, many argue, speaks volumes. But this story isn't just about Jay-Z. It's about the network. About an empire built not only on talent and vision, but on secrecy and control. It's about the handlers, the promoters, the publicists, the bodyguards, all the people who may have known something but said nothing. It's about the victims, nameless, faceless for now, who suffered quietly while the world cheered for their abusers on Grammy stages. And it's about justice, about whether the system has finally reached a breaking point, about whether the truth, no matter how powerful the person it indicts, will finally surface. For years, rumors about Diddy's parties circulated like urban legends. Whispers in green rooms, cryptic social media posts, ex-employees mysteriously fired. Now, we know those weren't just rumors. With Diddy facing active charges for trafficking and racketeering, and multiple former insiders lining up to testify, the spotlight is widening. The rope is tightening, and the next names to fall may be even bigger than his. So why Jay-Z? Why now? Because silence is no longer safe. Because the walls of secrecy that once protected the elite are starting to crack. Because too many voices, too many receipts, too many damning connections have surfaced to keep this buried any longer. Rogan ends his segment with a challenge. If this shocks you, good. It should. But don't just be shocked. Start asking why no one told you sooner. Start asking who else is on that list. Start asking how many more victims never made it out. That challenge is where we begin. In this video, we will break down exactly what Joe Rogan said, what the arrest warrant claims, and how Jay-Z's name ended up among those accused of covering up one of the darkest conspiracies in the entertainment industry. We'll explore the role of victims, the response from Hollywood, and what this means for the future of celebrity power. We will question everything, because if the biggest names in entertainment are willing to protect evil for the sake of image, then nothing and no one is above scrutiny. This isn't about cancel culture. This is about criminal accountability. And if the charges hold true, if the evidence is as damning as it appears, then what's coming isn't a scandal. It's an earthquake. Let's begin. The story of Sean Diddy Combs is one of meteoric success. In the 1990s, he was the definition of American ambition, building an empire out of nothing but vision, hustle, and charisma. But underneath that glamour and prestige, a darker narrative was forming, one that only now is being fully exposed. To understand how someone like Diddy could become entangled in allegations of trafficking, coercion, and organized abuse, one must look back at how he gained power, and more importantly, how he kept it. Diddy's rise wasn't just rapid, it was dominant. From the start, he was not merely an artist or producer. He was an orchestrator. In his early days at Uptown Records, he displayed a ferocious work ethic and a talent for recognizing stardom before it emerged. When he launched Bad Boy Records in 1993, he quickly built a musical dynasty. The label housed giants like the Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, Maze, 112, and Total. Under Diddy's vision, hip-hop music took on a polished, commercial edge that exploded into the mainstream. Diddy was more than a music executive, he was a master of the cultural moment. He made himself the face of his brand, appearing in music videos, dancing behind his artists, and donning designer suits. He was in magazines, on television, and in headlines. He wasn't just part of the culture, he was reshaping it in real time. But power, when left unchecked, often evolves into something more dangerous. As Diddy's empire grew, so did the stories whispered about his behind-the-scenes behavior. Rumors surfaced of excessive parties, strict NDAs, and an inner circle that functioned more like a fortified kingdom than a music label. He controlled everything: his artists' public images, their finances, their appearances, and even their silence. The parties were the first thing to gain public curiosity. Lavish events in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami, always exclusive, always mysterious. Invitations were scarce, and those who attended often never spoke about what happened inside. These weren't just gatherings, they were rituals of power. Rooms full of celebrities, influencers, and media insiders, all drinking, all indulging, all watching. Over time, the glitz started to blend with discomfort. The laughter seemed a little too forced. The guest list began including figures whose presence raised eyebrows, not because they were famous, but because of their reputations. Yet, the media never pushed. Why? Because Diddy had clout. He could launch a career with a single phone call. He could kill a story with another. Reporters who tried to look too closely at the inner workings of his circle found themselves shut out, discredited, or suddenly reassigned. Diddy was no fool. He invested in relationships. He understood the game, and he played it better than almost anyone. By the 2000s, Diddy's influence extended far beyond music. He ventured into fashion with Sean John, earning accolades and awards. He expanded into television, launching Making the Band, and becoming a staple of pop culture. He appeared at White House events, sat on advisory boards, and was embraced by political and business elites. He was the American dream in action, young, black, successful, self-made. The world saw a mogul. The industry saw a kingmaker. What no one saw, or chose not to see, was the rot forming at the base of it all. Insiders described Diddy's circle during those years as tight, paranoid, and hierarchical. Access to him was restricted. Those who worked with him closely were required to sign airtight non-disclosure agreements. New artists, assistants, drivers, and even caterers were reportedly warned not to ask questions or speak out of turn. Many didn't even last a week. And those who did, they either rose in power or disappeared without a trace. There were signs, though. Lawsuits began to pile up, some public, many quietly settled. Accusations of abuse, breach of contract, and even physical threats. Former employees spoke in vague terms, hinting at the emotional toll of working under him. Still, the machine kept moving. Because Diddy wasn't alone. He was protected, not just by lawyers, but by an ecosystem that benefited from his success. Corporations, media outlets, politicians all invested in the illusion of his invincibility. Then came the partnerships. Diddy was never content with just being the face of Bad Boy. He expanded his empire by aligning with others who held equal or greater influence. One of those men was Jay-Z. Their partnership wasn't just professional, it was symbolic. Two black billionaires who'd built their empires from the streets of New York. They supported each other publicly, appeared together at high-profile events, and were frequently hailed as examples of generational wealth and vision. But now, with the floodgates opening, people are re-examining that relationship. Because while Diddy was the public showman, Jay-Z was the strategist, the one with access to law firms, media consultants, and corporate protection. Together, they created a cultural fortress. They helped shape not just music, but the way success was defined. They sold us on the American ideal. Work hard, make your money, silence your critics. But now, the silence is cracking. The most critical period in Diddy's rise was from 2003. The most critical period in Diddy's rise was from 2003 to 2015. This was the era when he transitioned from being a music mogul to becoming a full-fledged media and fashion entrepreneur. During this time, he established Revolt TV, launched Ciroc Vodka into superstardom through aggressive celebrity marketing, and continued building his persona as a tastemaker. He was seen as both the gatekeeper and kingmaker. Those who were close to him prospered. Those who crossed him disappeared into irrelevance. Yet what was always left unsaid, what was only murmured in circles that never made it to camera, was the behavior behind closed doors. Several former assistants, event staff, and models who worked at or around Diddy-hosted events began to leak stories over the years. Nothing concrete at first, just strange tales of girls arriving but never leaving through the front. Of A-list guests signing more than just NDAs. Of rooms sealed off at parties. Some likened it to a cult. Others said it felt more like organized blackmail. Elaborate parties used to trap, record, and control. It wasn't until civil lawsuits started piling up, filed under pseudonyms, dismissed quietly, some ending in sealed settlements, that the whispers gained weight. But still, the industry protected him. Why? Because Diddy had long made himself indispensable. Not just culturally, but financially. He had partnerships with major brands, investment ties with global entertainment firms, and close personal alliances with power players in media and politics. Taking him down would mean untangling years of interconnected deals, reputation management networks, and mutual secrets. Diddy, in short, didn't just hold secrets, he was one. And part of that protection came from his ability to pivot attention. When things got too hot, a new business venture would launch, or a scandal involving someone else would dominate the headlines. But those who watched closely noticed a disturbing pattern. Victims who tried to come forward were discredited. Media outlets that asked too many questions lost access. People inside the industry simply looked the other way, because they knew, maybe not everything, but enough to make them stay silent. That silence is now cracking. With the federal investigation now public, those same sealed documents Joe Rogan referenced are allegedly tracing a long-standing pattern of obstruction, manipulation, and coercion, and not just by Diddy, but by others who helped protect the network. That includes lawyers, former executives, and most explosively Jay-Z. Because as Diddy's power expanded, so did his need for strategic cover. Enter Jay-Z, already one of the most respected moguls in entertainment, with powerful connections in legal, business, and political circles. According to the allegations made public through Rogan's disclosure, Jay-Z didn't just offer moral support. He actively engaged in covering up victim complaints tied to specific Diddy events, especially those described in the files as involving non-consensual activities under duress. Some of the redacted case files mention wire transfers, victim intimidation, and non-disclosure buyouts coordinated through third-party intermediaries connected to both Diddy and Jay-Z's teams. These weren't isolated incidents, the documents claim. They were part of a systematic effort to silence complaints before they could snowball into lawsuits or criminal charges. And if these allegations hold up in court, they could represent one of the most sweeping entertainment cover-ups in U.S. history. But how was all this kept hidden for so long? Because power doesn't just corrupt, it insulates. Diddy built a brand around invincibility. He promoted positivity, reinvention, and success. He spoke about uplifting Black communities, empowering the next generation, and making it out. That's what made him untouchable for so long. He wore philanthropy like armor. He was a symbol, until he wasn't. And it's not just about Diddy anymore. It's about the culture that allowed it. The agencies that kept sending girls to his events. The record labels that turned a blind eye. The publicists who buried stories. The legal teams that forced settlements with clauses preventing survivors from speaking out. The journalists who knew more than they published. Joe Rogan's revelations didn't just name Jay-Z. They cracked open a dam that's been building pressure for years. It's no longer about one man's guilt. It's about a system built on silence and maintained by fear. Rogan's episode took a direct approach. He didn't speculate. He read from the documents. He quoted witnesses. He named names. And in doing so, he became one of the first major media voices to risk his platform in pursuit of a truth that too many others still avoid. So why now? Why is all of this unraveling today, after decades of whispers? Because the playbook of silence no longer works in the digital age. The gatekeepers have lost control of the narrative. Victims have found new ways to be heard. Investigators have gathered more digital evidence than ever before. Emails, messages, transaction histories, location data. The web that once protected these men is now exposing them. The rise of Diddy was unprecedented. His fall may be just as historic. But it's not just about justice for what he did. It's about accountability for those who helped him do it. Because when you rise through the industry by bending the rules, silencing your critics, and building an empire on fear, the question isn't if it will all collapse. It didn't come with fireworks or a press release. There was no media leak, no breaking news headline on television. The first real sign that something seismic was unfolding came in the form of Joe Rogan's voice. A calm, calculated delivery that pierced through the noise of a typical podcast episode and left millions of listeners stunned in silence. For years, Rogan had dabbled in conversations others wouldn't touch, but this time was different. This wasn't a theory. This was a revelation, pulled from deep inside the federal machinery that had remained quiet for decades. And what he revealed? A sealed arrest warrant, complete with redacted files, names, timestamps, transaction logs, and, most shockingly, direct references to Jay-Z. Rogan began that particular episode with none of his usual meandering. He jumped straight into it. "You're not going to believe what I'm about to say," he warned his audience, "but every word of it is real, and you're going to want to listen closely." With that, he described how a federal investigation tied to Diddy's ongoing human trafficking and racketeering case had turned up names that were never supposed to see the light of day. Not just witnesses, not just victims, but collaborators, enablers. And among them was one of the most powerful cultural icons in modern history, Jay-Z. According to Rogan, the files he obtained were not meant to be made public. They were part of an internal Justice Department report prepared in tandem with a sealed indictment that had been under consideration for more than 18 months. The arrest warrant itself was reportedly for a series of charges tied to obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Specifically, the intentional interference with federal investigations surrounding sexual misconduct, coercion, and the trafficking of minors. What made the document chilling wasn't just its existence, but its detail. The language was precise. Multiple incidents dating back as far as 2006 were documented. One section referenced a private gathering in Miami, hosted at a luxury property tied to Diddy's estate, where a female victim claimed she was forcibly retained for over 36 hours. The girl, whose name remains protected under victim anonymity protocols, allegedly attempted to contact local law enforcement but was intercepted. The file alleges that shortly afterward, a payment was arranged through a third-party entertainment agent. That payment, totaling $750,000, was flagged in a Treasury Department surveillance report due to its unusual routing. And the person who allegedly authorized the transaction? According to the file, it was traced back to an LLC connected to Jay-Z's management firm. Rogan read this section aloud with a tense, deliberate cadence. The subject identified as S. Carter was listed as co-signer on the disbursement form. Victim testimony corroborates direct verbal threats made to ensure her silence. Physical coercion confirmed via medical report. Law enforcement report suppressed at the request of private legal counsel. It was the moment where listeners stopped what they were doing. The room went cold. This wasn't just gossip. This was evidence, submitted, recorded, preserved. And it was coming from a source with no allegiance to the entertainment industry, no corporate sponsor leaning over his shoulder. Just Rogan, his microphone, and a file he knew would blow open everything. He went on to say that this wasn't an isolated incident. There were more. At least 7 documented payoffs directly linked to Diddy-hosted events between 2004 and 2017. In 4 of those cases, payments allegedly originated from accounts tied to Jay-Z's business network. The files laid out a pattern, one that investigators described as active suppression of material witness complaints through financial, legal, and reputational pressure. But where did these files come from? Rogan, careful to protect his source, refused to reveal how he obtained them. But he hinted at a whistleblower, an individual embedded within a federal oversight committee who had grown frustrated with the lack of prosecutorial movement. According to Rogan, this source approached him directly with a digital dossier, fully encrypted, demanding only that the truth be told. And the reason for the leak? The DOJ was allegedly stalling. There were internal disagreements about whether indicting someone like Jay-Z would be politically sustainable, given his connections to major Democratic donors, corporate boards, and global philanthropic networks. In short, the machine was protecting itself. But the whistleblower wasn't interested in politics. They were interested in justice. And Rogan, known for sidestepping the traditional media, became the perfect conduit. Not part of the system, not beholden to its rules. Someone who could take the documents, read them on air, and put pressure where it mattered most on public opinion. As Rogan worked through the files, he paused to analyze the structure of the case. He pointed out that this wasn't a dragnet. It wasn't a sloppy attempt to bring down an entire industry. It was targeted, deliberate, surgical. The authorities weren't interested in celebrities who attended the parties. They were after the ones who made the parties what they were, who protected them, who cleaned them up. And Jay-Z's alleged role in all of this, according to Rogan's reading, wasn't that of an abuser, but a facilitator, a fixer. Someone who used his legal teams, financial networks, and public image to deflect scrutiny and keep the machine running. One quote stood out from the files, publicly distant, privately essential. That quote, Rogan said, summarized the problem perfectly. Jay-Z, through strategic silence and well-timed interventions, had become the firewall. The figure who could walk into any room and silence a storm. He wasn't just an artist. He was the shield. But now, that shield is under fire. The files also contained excerpts from depositions, victims describing not only their abuse but the moments after. The silence. The warnings. The envelope full of cash. The phone call from someone high up saying, "You don't want to make this worse for yourself." Rogan read these statements with visible strain in his voice. He knew the impact it would have. He also knew the backlash was coming. The podcast, once aired, immediately drew attempts to discredit it. Powerful PR firms issued veiled statements. Some tried to suggest Rogan had been misled. But crucially, no legal cease and desist letter ever arrived. Not one lawyer from Jay-Z's camp formally demanded the podcast be taken down. That, Rogan pointed out, was telling. Because if the documents were false, if the claims were fabricated, then where was the lawsuit? Silence can speak louder than denial. The larger question Rogan asked, both directly and implicitly, was this: what happens now? If the documents are legitimate, and his source swears they are, then why haven't charges been filed? Why is Jay-Z still walking red carpets, signing deals, and shaping culture like nothing's wrong? What does that say about our justice system? About fame? About the cost of telling the truth in an industry built on perception? The Rogan episode marked a turning point. No longer could these allegations be confined to conspiracy forums or YouTube deep dives. They had entered the mainstream conversation. Lawmakers began asking questions. Journalists, once too afraid to touch the subject, started quietly investigating. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding accountability. But Rogan wasn't finished. He ended the episode with a quiet warning, not just to Jay-Z, but to everyone in that circle. There's more, he said. A lot more. And the people who think they're safe? They won't be for long. The origins of the warrant, then, are more than just legal documents. They are evidence of a system unraveling, of secrets forced into the light. And if Joe Rogan's episode is only the beginning, then the road ahead will be unlike anything Hollywood has faced in decades. When Jay-Z's name first appeared in the sealed documentation, it sent shockwaves through the entertainment world, not because people believed he couldn't be involved, but because he had spent decades perfecting the image of someone who never had to get his hands dirty. But the revelation suggested something else entirely. That Jay-Z was not merely in the room when silence was bought, he was the one who orchestrated it. The allegations outlined in the federal documents obtained and discussed by Joe Rogan are not vague, sweeping insinuations. They are meticulous, specific. Names, dates, transactions. According to the files, Jay-Z is not under investigation for direct acts of violence or trafficking. Rather, his alleged role is in suppressing victims who tried to speak out, shutting down investigations before they could gain traction, intercepting lawsuits, and redirecting attention away from Diddy's private events. This distinction is critical. The allegations do not position Jay-Z as an aggressor, but as a facilitator of silence. The man who, through immense power and influence, helped maintain the structure that allowed others to commit horrific acts without consequence. In the world of law, this doesn't make him innocent. It makes him complicit. One case outlined in the documents describes a 17-year-old girl, referred to only by initials, who claimed she was assaulted at a luxury penthouse suite party in 2012. According to her testimony, she was flown in under the promise of a modeling audition and instead found herself isolated, drugged, and abused by multiple men. When she regained enough clarity to flee, she contacted a friend who advised her to go to the press. That attempt was intercepted. Days later, she received an anonymous payout deposited into her mother's bank account, accompanied by an NDA. Investigators believe the funds were tied to a shell company registered under a Roc Nation executive's name. The documents link the chain of custody of that money back to a private fund allegedly managed by Jay-Z's team. Another incident mentioned a Los Angeles gathering in 2016 where multiple underage women were allegedly transported from out of state without parental consent. The file includes email evidence from a Diddy assistant referencing event coordination cleared by Jay. It's unclear whether Jay refers to Jay-Z or another figure, but the investigators cite it as part of a broader pattern. The email stopped short of confirming involvement, but follow-up records showed legal teams associated with Jay-Z reaching out to the parties in question less than a week after complaints were filed. Perhaps the most disturbing testimony comes from a former Roc Nation employee who claimed he was instructed, on more than one occasion, to handle what he called deep sweeps of social media, legal filings, and press inquiries regarding Diddy's private events. He described working with a digital security team tasked with scrubbing mentions of specific parties, suppressing hashtags, and intimidating online users who attempted to resurface accusations. This employee stated under oath that the instruction came from the top and included veiled threats if he ever went public. There was this unspoken rule, the testimony reads, that nothing associated with those parties was ever to go beyond the room. If it did, we were to handle it quietly, aggressively, and permanently. Jay was not just aware. He was directing traffic. In a separate section of the warrant files, Jay-Z is alleged to have used his influence over high-powered attorneys and crisis management consultants to shield Diddy and himself from scrutiny. One entry details a $2 million retainer paid to a Los Angeles law firm specializing in reputation management and legal suppression. This firm, unnamed in the documents due to confidentiality laws, is said to have provided services including out-of-court settlements, aggressive legal intimidation, and coordination with media outlets to bury damaging stories. The word that appears again and again in the documents is interference. Jay-Z, through his legal machinery and financial reach, allegedly interfered with the natural course of justice. Victims who began the legal process found their cases stalled. Journalists ready to publish were redirected, denied comment, or outright threatened with defamation suits. One case even notes a private investigator hired to follow a reporter working on a story about Diddy's private events. That investigator, once subpoenaed, identified Jay-Z's legal team as the contracting party. To understand the full impact of these allegations, one must grasp the magnitude of Jay-Z's influence. He is not a mere celebrity. He sits on the boards of billion-dollar companies. He partners with the NFL. He's a household name not just in music, but in tech, finance, real estate, and social activism. His face is synonymous with power and respect. That is what made him the perfect protector. The cultural weight he carries has insulated him for years. Critics who questioned his motives were often dismissed as jealous or bitter. His defenders are legion, loyal, and often wealthy. This public trust allowed him to operate above suspicion and perhaps, according to the documents, behind the scenes as an architect of concealment. Rogan raised this exact issue during his podcast. Jay-Z's brilliance, he said, was not just in how he built himself up. It was how he positioned himself so far above reproach that no one even dared ask what he was doing when the cameras were off. The podcast also featured a segment where Rogan played a previously unreleased audio clip of a former event planner who worked for Roc Nation and Diddy's team in a freelance capacity. The woman, whose voice was modified for protection, claimed she had arranged multiple private transportation services for unlisted guests, often under aliases. She described being asked to destroy travel itineraries and mobile phone logs after each event. It was like clockwork, she said. After every party, we'd erase the digital footprint. No photos, no texts, no record of who was there or when. She concluded her statement with a chilling admission, "I stayed quiet because I thought speaking out would ruin my life. But I'm not the only one who knows. Everyone who worked those parties knew. The only thing that kept us quiet was fear, and the people we feared were always smiling in public." As more stories like this emerge, the pressure is mounting, not just legally, but culturally. Jay-Z, once the embodiment of success against all odds, now finds himself at the center of a moral reckoning. Public sentiment is beginning to shift. His silence, once seen as composure, is now being questioned as complicity. He has made no public statements, no denials, no clarifications. And to many, that silence feels strategic, lawyer-advised, risk-calculated. But in a time when silence is no longer enough to evade judgment, that strategy may be collapsing. People want answers. They want justice. And if even half of the information revealed in those documents is true, then Jay-Z's legacy is no longer about music. It's about power, and how that power was used, not to elevate, but to erase. In every powerful scandal, there are names and there are shadows. The headlines often feature the former, the celebrities, moguls, and billionaires, but in the shadows are the victims, the ones who live with the trauma. The ones who were silenced, bought off, or ignored. In the unfolding revelations surrounding Sean Diddy Combs and the alleged cover-up by Jay-Z, it's their stories that carry the most weight. Because the truth doesn't come from contracts or court filings alone. It comes from pain that refuses to be buried. When Joe Rogan unveiled the sealed federal warrant implicating Jay-Z as a facilitator of silence, he didn't just read names. He read voices, testimonies, statements made under duress, behind closed doors, sometimes anonymously, but always with the kind of raw authenticity that can't be manufactured. These were the stories that weren't meant to be heard, buried by legal teams, buried by power, buried by fear. One of the most heart-wrenching testimonies came from a woman identified in the documents as VA, a pseudonym used to protect her identity. She claimed she was just 19 years old when she was invited to an exclusive after-party in Manhattan in 2011. The invite had come from a promoter affiliated with a Rock Nation event, who promised her career-making exposure. What followed, she said, was a night that altered the course of her life. According to her sworn deposition, she was escorted to a penthouse suite where the mood quickly shifted. The energy was strange, dim lighting, closed-off rooms, and men she recognized from magazines and music videos. There were rules. Phones were taken at the door. No photos. No names. Just faces. After a few drinks, she began feeling disoriented. Her last clear memory was being led down a hallway by someone she later identified from a surveillance still image as a known associate of Sean Combs. She woke up hours later, alone, bruised, and confused. Her clothes were missing. Her purse was gone. When she reported the incident to her friend the next morning, the response wasn't one of concern, but fear. Her friend, also in the entertainment world, told her plainly, "Don't say anything. They will destroy you." She tried to file a report, but the police officer at the precinct told her the club didn't keep records of who hosted what. No security footage was ever obtained. A few weeks later, she received an envelope at her apartment. Inside was $10,000 in cash. No note. No contact. Just the money and a legal-looking form marked with non-disclosure language. She didn't sign it, but she also never spoke again. Not until now. Another voice surfaced in the files under the pseudonym S.T. Her story took place in Los Angeles during Grammy weekend in 2015. She was 17 at the time, though she claims she used a fake ID to attend what she thought was a networking event. Instead, it was a closed-door mansion gathering hosted by associates of Diddy. According to her account, there were at least 2 other underage girls at the property. Liquor flowed freely, and security was tight. Too tight. Doors were locked from the inside. When she began feeling unsafe and attempted to leave, she said she was physically blocked by 2 men who told her, "No one leaves until it's over." She was eventually allowed to leave through a back entrance by a sympathetic staff member, but the damage had already been done. The trauma haunted her for years. When she began therapy at 22, she finally found the strength to contact authorities. Her report was filed, but it was never acted upon. She later discovered, through a leak, that her original complaint had been quietly dismissed after the LAPD received pressure from private attorneys. The attorney on record was affiliated with a major legal firm known to represent Rock Nation's interests. One of the most harrowing elements of these stories isn't just the abuse, it's what came after. Time and again, the pattern repeats itself. A party, a promise, a violation, a moment of attempted justice, and then a wall. Victims were met not with compassion, but with silence. In many cases, threats. One woman, KL, said she received a call from an unknown number just 48 hours after she filed a civil suit. The voice on the line was male, calm, and terrifying in its certainty. "You're playing a dangerous game. You're not ready for what happens next," the voice said. She dropped the case within the week. Another victim, RD, tried to go public with her story via a journalist she trusted. The journalist agreed, initially, even interviewed her for over 2 hours. But within days, the story vanished. The journalist stopped responding. When she pressed, she was told that editorial decisions had changed. That journalist later took a job as a communications director for a media firm that counts Rock Nation as one of its biggest clients. These patterns weren't coincidental. They were systemic. Victims weren't just ignored, they were managed, routed through legal gauntlets designed to exhaust them. Financially drained, emotionally battered, isolated from each other. Many of them didn't know there were others, that they weren't alone, that the same names kept appearing in their nightmares. Joe Rogan highlighted this during his podcast. He didn't just talk about the victim's words, he contextualized them. This wasn't sloppiness, he said. This was deliberate. These women weren't lost in the system. They were silenced by it. One particularly disturbing portion of the documents revealed internal memos exchanged between legal teams representing both Diddy and Jay-Z. These memos discussed containment strategies for sensitive accusations, including specific financial settlements tied to non-disclosure clauses that rendered victims permanently mute under threat of lawsuit. The memos referred to these individuals not as people, but as assets, risks, and variables. Behind every memo, every sealed envelope, was a human being who suffered, often alone. But something has changed. With the release of these documents and Rogan's podcast broadcasting the truth to millions, the wall is cracking. Several of the women mentioned in the documents have since been contacted by federal investigators. Some are beginning to speak publicly, emboldened by the fact that their stories are no longer isolated whispers. They are part of a larger pattern, a grotesque machine that thrived in the shadows. A growing coalition of survivors has now begun meeting through digital support forums. Legal teams unaffiliated with the entertainment industry are stepping in, offering pro bono services to survivors previously locked in by fear or financial barriers. Whistleblowers from inside the entertainment world have begun reaching out, assistants, housekeepers, former drivers, each with a piece of the puzzle. These stories are no longer anecdotal. They are evidence. And perhaps the most tragic reality is that many of these women never wanted fame, revenge, or attention. They wanted closure, recognition, a simple admission that what happened to them mattered, that they mattered. Now, for the first time in years, they are being heard. There is a pattern that emerges in every sprawling conspiracy of institutional abuse, not just in the acts themselves, but in what happens after. The cover-ups, the threats, the evidence that vanishes, and the people who are never heard from again. In the case of Sean Diddy, Combs, and the network of high-powered enablers exposed by Joe Rogan's revelations, that pattern is not only present, it's overwhelming. And it centers around three critical components: the compromised witnesses, the missing or leaked footage, and the silencing of staff members who dared to ask questions. The sealed documents Rogan obtained and discussed didn't just mention victims. They pointed to a deliberate infrastructure built to protect those at the top by neutralizing those at the bottom. It was an ecosystem designed to erase truth in real time, and if necessary, to erase the people who tried to share it. At the heart of this structure was a rotating door of staffers, personal assistants, event coordinators, drivers, bodyguards, cleaning crews, and private security consultants. These were not household names. These were the people behind the velvet curtain, the ones who saw everything without ever being seen. They knew the layout of the rooms, the real names behind aliases on guest lists, the times when underage girls were escorted into suites under fake credentials. They saw the aftermath, the fear, the confusion, the hurried cleanup jobs. And they were warned, either explicitly or through unspoken ritual, not to speak. Several entries in the documents reveal cases of former staff members who tried to step forward with information. A driver, labeled as Staff Member B in the report, testified in private to federal investigators in 2021. He described nights when he was instructed to pick up young women from hotels and drive them to private locations for, after events, always under vague instructions. On one occasion, he reported seeing a girl crying in the back seat. She tried to ask him where she was being taken. When he tried to respond, a bodyguard seated next to her grabbed his shoulder and shook his head. He remained quiet until one day, after discussing the incident with a friend, he received a threatening message. A letter had been slipped under his apartment door. Inside was a single phrase typed in all capital letters: "We don't forget." The very next day, he changed addresses and has remained in hiding ever since. The FBI report confirms he is now under witness protection after providing testimony implicating multiple high-level event organizers. Another staffer, a catering assistant identified as EC, worked at a birthday event thrown by one of Diddy's closest associates in 2014. She stated that halfway through the event, she was asked to assist a private group upstairs. She found a room that had been cleared of all cameras. There were 6 men, all of them famous, and several young women who looked terrified. She claimed she left the room within seconds but never forgot what she saw. 2 weeks later, she was fired. No reason given. When she tried to reach out to other staff members who had been at the event, she found her numbers blocked, her emails bouncing back. A few months after that, she was served with a legal letter from an anonymous entity reminding her of the NDA she had signed. The language was aggressive. If she spoke out, she would be sued for millions. Her story didn't reemerge until her name showed up in the federal documents, this time attached to a note from an agent stating, "Potential material witness under duress." Then came the footage. Perhaps the most explosive detail in Rogan's podcast was the mention of what federal sources referred to as corrupted surveillance logs. These were recordings made at some of the luxury venues Diddy frequently rented for his private events, locations with built-in security systems designed to keep records for liability reasons. According to the documents, multiple files from these venues had gone missing, wiped, or overwritten within days of the events taking place. In one case, a 5-hour surveillance log from a Miami hotel was mysteriously deleted just 48 hours after an event where 3 women later reported being assaulted. When hotel security staff inquired about the deletion, they were told the file had been corrupted. But a digital forensic specialist later confirmed in a sealed report that the deletion had been manual and intentional. In another case, an external hard drive containing footage from a party in Las Vegas vanished from the hotel's security office. What made this even more suspicious was that 2 guards assigned to the event quit just days after the footage disappeared. One of them, interviewed anonymously by an independent journalist last year, said he believed they were being watched. "I got spooked," the guard said in the interview. "I didn't know what was on that footage. But I know they wanted it gone, and they were willing to pay or threaten whatever it took." Even more damning was the confirmation that some footage did, in fact, survive. And it's now in the hands of federal authorities. One clip, heavily redacted but described in detail in the court records, allegedly shows a scene involving a well-known music executive and a young woman who appears visibly intoxicated, being led into a room by 2 men. The timestamp on the video matches the testimony of one of the victims who described being drugged and assaulted that same night. According to Rogan's report, this footage is one of the central pieces of evidence the FBI intends to use to prove a pattern of abuse and obstruction. But there's a deeper implication here, because if this footage exists, and if it was covered up for years, then the entire system of silence wasn't just informal. It was operational, deliberate, coordinated. Employees who tried to come forward were labeled disloyal, blacklisted. Some ended up jobless. Others claimed their families were harassed. A housekeeper who worked at one of Diddy's vacation homes in the Bahamas filed a report stating that after overhearing a disturbing conversation between 2 guests about keeping her quiet, she returned to her quarters to find her belongings had been rifled through. Nothing was stolen, but her phone was gone and replaced with a burner phone. She left that same night. There are also reports of private investigators hired to track potential leaks. One file details a woman, referred to only as WF, who attempted to speak to a journalist about what she saw at one of the freak-off parties. The next week, a black SUV followed her for 3 consecutive days. When she went to the police, she was told she needed more proof. A week later, she moved to a different state and cut off all contact with the outside world. These are not isolated stories. They form a mosaic of terror, an underground network of silence that extended far beyond Diddy himself. It was a structure with layers: legal suppression at the top, digital surveillance in the middle, and ground-level intimidation at the base. And according to the evidence, Jay-Z's team had access to every level, not only through financial payouts but through active monitoring of anyone who could become a liability. This is what makes the current investigation so dangerous for the accused. Because it's no longer about a single bad night or a rogue employee. It's about an entire machinery that kept the truth buried for over 2 decades. And now, with whistleblowers stepping forward and footage being unsealed, the gears of that machine are grinding to a halt. Rogan concluded this part of his report with a sobering truth. These aren't stories. They're warnings. Warnings from people who watched others suffer and were told to stay quiet or else. And that or else was real. The question now isn't whether these systems existed. It's how long they've been operating and how many lives they destroyed in the name of power. To fully understand the magnitude of Jay-Z's alleged involvement in covering up what many now refer to as the darkest open secret in entertainment, one must look beyond the man himself and into the architecture that surrounded him. Jay-Z didn't operate in isolation. Like every powerful figure, he was insulated by a network. An inner circle that handled his affairs, enforced his wishes, and protected his image. But in the context of the sealed federal documents referenced by Joe Rogan, that very network has become a focus of scrutiny. Because if Jay-Z was helping Diddy silence victims and erase evidence, then others must have known. The question now is, who were they, and what exactly did they do? Jay-Z's inner circle is made up of high-level executives, publicists, legal advisors, digital consultants, and longtime collaborators, many of whom have been with him since his early days at Rockefeller Records. Over time, this circle evolved into the infrastructure that powers Roc Nation and all of its subsidiaries. It includes figures with direct access to artists, contracts, crisis response teams, and, crucially, legal documentation. These are not random employees. They are deeply trusted operatives who move silently, invisibly, in service of a brand built on invincibility. One of the names that has come under increasing scrutiny in the documents is a senior legal advisor listed as TM, who has worked closely with both Roc Nation and several of Jay-Z's private ventures. According to the documents Rogan reviewed, this advisor played a pivotal role in organizing legal strategies around settlements with victims tied to Diddy-hosted events. Several wire transfers to plaintiffs, marked confidential, originated from holding companies this individual helped establish. In one instance, a payment exceeding $1.3 million was traced to a firm registered in the British Virgin Islands, with TM listed as a controlling officer. When questioned by federal agents, TM reportedly insisted that all settlements were standard practice in high-risk corporate environments and denied any knowledge of wrongdoing. But the files suggest otherwise. A chain of internal emails provided by a whistleblower shows that TM had full access to at least 3 victim testimonies, including detailed descriptions of abuse. One email ends with a chilling note: "We need to shut this down before she becomes another headline." Another critical figure is LH, a media strategist long rumored to be the mastermind behind several of Jay-Z's most effective public image redirections. LH is not a household name, but has worked behind the scenes on major brand partnerships, philanthropic campaigns, and digital cleanup operations. According to the federal files, this strategist coordinated suppression campaigns targeting online platforms where victims attempted to share their stories. Documents show LH liaising with social media moderators, pushing for content removals under the guise of copyright claims and privacy violations. The goal, investigators say, was simple: drown out the story before it gained momentum. Perhaps most disturbingly, there are mentions of a tight circle of personal security personnel. Individuals identified in the files only by their initials, who allegedly carried out orders that extended beyond protection. They weren't just hired to guard Jay-Z. They were tasked with identifying threats, intercepting conversations, and, in some cases, physically confronting individuals attempting to speak out. One such case is documented in a security log leaked to authorities in 2022. The log refers to a confrontation with a former employee attempting to contact a reporter. The employee was approached outside her apartment and discouraged from further contact. The report does not mention direct violence, but the implication of coercion is clear. What emerges from these files is not a rogue operation. It is a command structure. Jay-Z, according to the evidence, did not have to lift a finger. He had people, layers of distance, multiple levels of plausible deniability. And yet, the paper trail exists. One of the strongest indications that this inner circle was fully aware of their role in protecting something illicit comes from an internal memo dated February 2017. The memo, recovered from an encrypted email server linked to Roc Nation's crisis team, outlines a detailed risk assessment following an anonymous tip-off sent to BuzzFeed News. The tip contained allegations of abuse at a Diddy-hosted party in Los Angeles, implicating multiple figures, including Jay-Z's legal proxy. Rather than launch an internal investigation or reach out to potential victims, the memo lays out a 5-tier plan. Immediate reach out to social media platforms for post-takedown requests. Retainer activation for crisis management firms in New York and London. Legal outreach to BuzzFeed's editorial team to delay story publication. Financial offers to known witnesses for silence extensions. Strategic redirection. Launch of a new philanthropic campaign focused on women's empowerment within 48 hours to offset potential backlash. Each point was marked with checkboxes. All were checked. Another revelation from the Rogan files involves a senior accountant, J.D., responsible for overseeing charitable contributions and grants managed through Jay-Z's social foundation. Though not directly tied to abuse claims, J.D. became a person of interest after several payments marked discretionary settlements were found under nonprofit outflows. These payments, which totaled over $4 million across 6 years, were sent to shell entities with no public-facing purpose. The dates of these payments align with the timeline of at least 4 major lawsuits against Diddy that never made it to trial. J.D. reportedly resigned in 2023, citing personal reasons. Since then, he has refused to speak to the media and has relocated overseas. Beyond the staff and strategists, there are also artists. Those who came up under Jay-Z's mentorship or were affiliated with Roc Nation. Some of them were regular attendees at the very events now under investigation. While the federal documents don't name these individuals as complicit, several are mentioned as witnesses. A few provided statements short, cautious, and vague. Others claimed ignorance. But one name stands out. A female artist, now a global superstar, is referenced in the files as Witness D. She was present at several high-profile parties in the early 2010s and allegedly confided in a friend about something being very wrong with the energy in those rooms. That friend later gave a sworn statement saying the artist had expressed regret for attending and claimed she saw things she wished she hadn't. Yet, when contacted by authorities, the artist declined to provide formal testimony. She cited career risk and a desire to move on. This silence speaks to the broader pressure inside Jay-Z's circle. Not just from legal advisors, but from the unspoken code of survival in the industry. Speak out, and your career may never recover. Stay quiet, and you keep your seat at the table. But the table is collapsing. As the investigation intensifies, insiders are beginning to defect. 2 former Roc Nation executives have agreed to cooperate with authorities. One of them, according to an internal memo, had access to every financial document tied to the firm's legal settlements. The other handled media liaisons and public-facing narratives for both Jay-Z and affiliated partners. Their testimonies are expected to play a pivotal role in determining whether Jay-Z's inner circle acted as a knowing shield to protect criminal acts, or were merely carrying out instructions without full knowledge of their consequences. Regardless of intent, the evidence is mounting that the circle functioned as a containment unit. It absorbed the damage, redirected scrutiny, erected legal firewalls. It allowed the abuse, exploitation, and corruption to continue, unchecked, uninterrupted, and invisible. Now, the light is seeping in. Until now, the public has largely understood the scandal unfolding around Sean, Diddy, Combs, and Jay-Z as a two-man operation, a secretive world built and protected by moguls with unlimited reach. But the documents Joe Rogan introduced on his podcast hinted at a far larger network. Hidden within the arrest warrant files and whistleblower testimonies were guest lists, attendance logs, and private communications that extend the web far beyond Diddy and Jay-Z. They introduced names that no one expected to see, celebrities revered across the globe for their talent, influence, and in some cases, activism. Among the most shocking revelations was the appearance of Oprah Winfrey's name across multiple event records. According to court materials reviewed and cited by Rogan, Oprah's name appeared on exclusive guest lists for events that were later investigated for hosting minors and vulnerable individuals under conditions now classified by federal authorities as exploitative. These weren't random, publicized galas or charity events. They were private affairs, often held at undisclosed mansions or secured resorts, and required biometric screening or pseudonym registration for entry. Some were organized directly by Diddy's inner circle, with Roc Nation executives handling logistics and guest outreach. The court documents do not accuse Oprah of any illegal activity. There is no evidence she witnessed or participated in abuse. However, what raised investigators' concerns was the frequency of her name appearing on invitation logs alongside confirmed attendees who are now under investigation for direct involvement in trafficking or cover-up activities. One internal communication from an event planner listed her under VIP confirmed, alongside entertainment and political figures now facing scrutiny. The question isn't whether Oprah participated in anything criminal. The issue is whether she knowingly attended events where abuse occurred and chose not to come forward. And if not, why hasn't she spoken up now? Leonardo DiCaprio's name surfaced under similar circumstances. The files include travel records, seating charts, and RSVP confirmations tying him to 4 events hosted between 2010 and 2018. In one instance, he was listed as arriving with a small entourage via private plane to a Diddy-hosted party in the Caribbean, held on an island estate now linked to multiple victim testimonies. DiCaprio, long known for his work on environmental and humanitarian causes, has remained silent. The documents do not implicate him in wrongdoing. However, one former security contractor described seeing him come in, see what was going on, and walk right back out. If true, that may explain his current silence, but silence does not absolve responsibility. Other celebrities named in the documents span across music, sports, and fashion. A few are repeat attendees of events now under federal investigation. While their specific roles remain unclear, their consistent presence paints a troubling picture of complicity by proximity, at the very least, a culture of willful ignorance within elite circles. For example, the name of a Grammy-winning female artist, widely admired for her outspoken advocacy for women's rights, appears in the guest logs of at least 3 private events in New York City, all coordinated through Roc Nation's back channel. Investigators have not determined her level of awareness, but a former employee of the venue claimed she was present the same night a victim alleges she was drugged. The staffer described her demeanor as cold, quiet, like she was there out of obligation. When questioned by media outlets recently, her team issued a short statement denying knowledge of wrongdoing and asserting she did not observe anything unusual. But again, the larger issue isn't what these celebrities did. It's what they didn't do. The events they attended were not just parties. They were hubs of access, influence, and, as victims claim, silent abuse. With high-level guests, secured entrances, confiscated phones, and opaque event organizers, these were environments engineered to shield those inside from external eyes. And with so many prominent figures present, one is left to wonder how no one ever spoke up, or why, if they did, they were buried so quickly. Perhaps the most damning aspect of these documents is the detail with which event logs were kept. Each private party maintained internal records for liability purposes, some later obtained through court subpoenas. These include timestamps of arrivals and departures, confidentiality waivers signed on-site, and in some cases, footage from security cameras installed in common areas. These documents, currently sealed from public view, were the basis of Rogan's commentary on how the same names, again and again, showed up on lists connected to illegal activity. One federal agent's memo, included in the investigative report, summarized the guest list pattern as not evidence of individual guilt but proof of a shared environment, engineered for excess and silenced accountability. In other words, these celebrities may not have committed crimes, but their consistent presence allowed those who did to hide in plain sight. Public reaction to the guest list leak has been swift. Social media erupted with demands for transparency. Hashtags calling on these high-profile figures to issue statements began trending globally. Some fan bases went into defensive overdrive. Others turned on their idols overnight. For many, this wasn't just about who was there. It was about trust, betrayal, and the realization that the people they admired may have helped normalize an environment of unchecked power. Behind the scenes, PR teams scrambled. Lawyers began issuing precautionary statements. Some celebrities quietly deleted photos from events now under investigation. Others unfollowed associates tied to the scandal. The walls of Hollywood's elite were showing cracks, not because of a single accuser, but because of a growing number of receipts, many now tied to federal investigations. Yet, even amid the chaos, a few voices have emerged. One actor, whose name appeared once on a guest list, but who has never been accused of wrongdoing, issued a full statement. In it, he confirmed his attendance at a Diddy-hosted event and expressed disgust after learning about the ongoing investigation. He admitted he felt uncomfortable at the event and left early. His statement ended with a direct quote. "If I had known what was really happening behind the scenes, I would have blown the whistle that night. And I should have asked more questions. That kind of ownership is rare, but it set a precedent." Within hours, two more low-level celebrities followed suit. Both admitted to being party-adjacent, unaware of abuse, but now open to speaking with investigators. That's the shift the system fears most, not just exposure, but defection. Once a few start talking, the whole structure begins to collapse, and the stakes for silence are only growing. According to the documents Rogan examined, prosecutors are preparing to subpoena several individuals whose names appear repeatedly across guest records, not as witnesses to abuse, but as possible material witnesses to the cover-up. One legal memo, leaked to a journalist last month, confirms that federal agents are working to determine who attended what event when, and more importantly, who saw what and chose not to report it. This is why the inclusion of names like Oprah and DiCaprio is so significant. It's not about celebrity gossip. It's about accountability. About questioning why individuals with vast platforms and moral authority said nothing when they were inside rooms where exploitation happened. Did they really not know? Or did they choose not to look? The coming weeks will be crucial. As the guest list files are further analyzed and cross-referenced with victim statements, the net will tighten. Some names will be cleared. Others will face subpoenas. And the public will be left with an uncomfortable truth that the circles we glorify, the events we glamorize, and the celebrities we worship may have all stood just a few feet away from unspeakable crimes and did nothing.